Alright, so I'm giving my feedback for the lesson What's My Grade? 6th grade that addresses the standard 6 RP3C, finding percent of a quantity as a rate per 100, and solve problems involving finding the whole given a part and a percent. So I always like to look at the standard map and make sure it has everything from the standard in it. So RP3C, it's everything listed. I always like to look at the do column to make sure the skill, we've got to calculate percents and solve problems involving whole, part, and percent. Okay. And I always look at the additional information. For this one, it says to aid in the development of proportional reasoning, the cross-product algorithm is not expected at this level. So I think that's interesting. I'm going to keep that in mind as I'm going. The lesson says it uses all these mathematical practices. Sounds a little sketchy to me to fit them all in one lesson, but I'm going to keep an open mind. I highlighted this activity. I liked the 4 corners to start with, and I liked how you tied it up at the end and asked if your answer changed or remained the same. I also really liked the emphasis of ratio tables. I thought that was good for the conceptual reasoning. I made myself a little example here to show what it might look like to make sure that we are emphasizing that it's a rate per 100 and that these are all equivalent ratios and the students could fill in the table multiple ways. So I highlighted things I liked. I thought right here they made a lot of leaps and there were a lot of questions. I might need to scaffold that just a little bit. I liked here it says that each group is going to share their thinking and their work. It said that would be evidence of MP3 and MP6. So I had to pull out my mathematical practices. Mathematical practice 3 was viable arguments and critiquing the reasoning. I agreed with that. Mathematical practice 6 was attending to precision. I think it's important to remember that one doesn't always just mean precision with numbers. It's also precision of language, which I think is true when we're explaining our reasoning, that they do need to use precise language, especially here things like whole, part, percent, equivalent would be things we would listen for. I did have the idea of maybe also adding pictures instead of just ratio tables to increase that conceptual reasoning just a little bit. Again, I liked the emphasis on ratio tables. I did think that there was one thing missing that I added, and that was questions where you would give the part and the percent and you had to find the whole. That was in the standard, but I didn't see any questions like that in the lesson. So I added an example. Jen made a 90% on a test and got 36 questions right. How many questions were on the test? And I did my version of kind of a percent bar, how I might figure that out. So I wanted to include questions like that since that was in the standard and I didn't see that. The last thing was the homework or the classwork exercises. I thought the questions were good. I did not like the models for the ratio tables. I didn't like how they had the same number of blocks for each one because it made it look like you had to fill all of them in. But then if you did, there weren't even enough blocks to get to 100. So I thought that was just a little misleading. I would have left the spaces blank and let students draw their own table or pictures or a percent bar to solve it. And then they could put their own number of blanks if they did ratio tables. So looking back, I feel like it was aligned to the standard except for questions like this, because it did specifically mention that in the standard. And I thought it did address some of the mathematical practices, and I thought there was a good emphasis on conceptual reasoning. So I'm interested to see if you had the same feedback.